Our Interfaith Assembly is about the need to explore religious diversity. The religious diversity specifically of the United States and its meaning for the American pluralistic experiment. Diana Eck of Harvard University has provided leadership for this pluralism project. She's done that since 1991. And we are grateful. How do we enhance and protect religious freedom in the overall context of human rights? Pluralism is not diversity alone, but the energetic engagement with diversity. Mere diversity without real encounter and relationships and assemblies like tonight will yield increasing tensions in our pluralism. And pluralism is not just tolerance, but the active seeking of understanding across lines of difference. Tolerance is a necessary but thin public virtue, which does not require any religious practitioner to know anything about the other. It does not remove ignorance, stereotypes, half-truths, fears that underlie old patterns of division and violence. Our ignorance of one another will be increasingly costly. Pluralism is not relativism, but the encounter of commitments. It means holding our deepest differences, even our religious differences, not in isolation, but in relationship to one another. Pluralism is based on dialogue. The language of pluralism is dialogue, encounter, give and take, criticism, and self-criticism, speaking and listening, a process revealing common understanding and real differences. Dialogue does not mean agreement. Pluralism means the commitment to being present with one's commitments. This, my brothers and sisters, is our call to assemble. I created this program to help people become aware that to be a moral cosmopolitan, you have to let your branches hang out across all fences. I think that's a good place for you to say amen. Yeah. We're going to begin our Interfaith Assembly by calling on a member imam of the Muslim community and a member of the Nichiren Buddhist community to lead us in prayer in their traditions. First, the Islamic imam, and then the Nichiren Buddhist.
Good evening. Peace be with you all. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. With God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer, praises for God. Dear God, O Allah, God of Abraham and Zechariah, God of Moses and Muhammad, in your name we pray. We ask that you witness this assembly, that you accept from us this offering. Dear God, we ask that you shower your provisions into this place and this blessed institution, that you protect it from harm and its enemies. We beseech you, dear God, for your guidance, for there is none who can guide but you. We seek your protection, for you are the ultimate protector. Forgive us when we wander, accept from us our humble return, and keep us always in your light. In your fullest and most encompassing name we pray. Amen.
Good evening. Couldn't hear you. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. My name is Richard Brown. I am a member of the Buddhist lay organization, Soka Gakkai International, under the leadership of Daisaku Ikeda. I am honored to share a Buddhist prayer with you today. Since the prayer is not in English, I want to say that from a Buddhist perspective, we are all connected by sound and vibrations. Chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo allows us to awaken our minds and activate our hearts to the fact that we are all one, that we are all born to serve, that we are all worthy of respect, and that we all have unlimited potential. Dr. King said it this way, and I quote, "In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality." Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Myoho Renge Kyo. Ben Panda Ni Ji Sei San Ju San Mai Anjo Niki Go Shari Hasu Buji Hei Jen Jen Mario Go Ji Hei Man Nange Nano. Is that show Nakashi Buddha show Fu no Chi show Ishaga Buddha Lo Shingan Hakoten Ma Nukamu Jojo Buddha Jingo Jo Buddha Mario Do Ho Yum Yo Show Jim Yo Show Fu Man Joju Jin Jin Mizo Ho Zuigi Show Zeta He Show Nange Shari Hasa Go Ju Jo Buddha He Ra Ju Jo and Nan Ju Ju He Yo Go and Gong Yo Mushu Ho Ben Indo Shu Jo Ro Ri Show Jaka Jo Ishaga Nora ho ben chicken, har Mr. Guy, he goes like a jury has a Nora chicken, Koda Jinnan Murio Muge. Ricky Mojo, he's in Joe Gata, Sama Jinno Muza Jojo is a Mizo, Uho, Shari has a Nora no. Shoujo from Bezagyo say Shoho Ganji, Nunin, Eka, Shushin, Shari has a show yo Ganji. Murio Muhan Mizo, Uho, Boosh, as a Jojo, she, Shari has a Fusho, Boosh, as a show we shaga. Busho Joju Dai Ichike Hu Nange Shi Ho Yo Buzu Nai no Kujin Sho Ho Jiso. Shui Sho Ho Nose So Nose Sho Nose Time Nose Ricky Nose Sam Nose Him Nose and Nose Ka Nose Ho Nose Hamma Kukioto. Shui Sho Ho Nose So Nose Sho Nose Time Nose Ricky Nose Sa. Nose and Nose Ka Nose Ho Nose Hamma Kukioto. Shui Sho Ho Nose So Nose Sho Nose Time Nose Ricky Nose Sa. Nose and Nose Ka Nose Ho Nose Hamma Kukioto. Nam yo ringe kyo, nam yo ringe kyo, nam yo ringe kyo, nam yo ringe kyo. Nam yo ringe kyo, nam yo ringe kyo, nam yo ringe kyo. Nam yo ringe kyo. Thank you very much.
Be not deceived by the number of empty red seats. I'm very happy to inform you that the King Chapel has lots of friends. They may not all be here, but they're exceptionally generous. I'm delighted to inform you that with us tonight is Clarice Polk, and she has given the chapel a new $100,000 Korean-made piano. That piano is open on the stage. I asked her to come and do for us a very creative, spontaneous interfaith medley to let you hear the sound of a Korean-made instrument. And now our occasion statement by the Reverend Angela Rice.
Good evening. We all sit here today in this glorious chapel that's through its renovation is prepared to continue the mission of honoring the religious and spiritual legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is a memorial that is living, breathing with the capacity to groom coming generations and to celebrate those who have gone before us and to nurture those who are here tonight and those who have been here over those 2 days. This renewed chapel provides a fresh anointing to the people who are sitting here tonight and to the people who will sit here in generations to come. They will listen to speakers from all across the world who come with a passion for justice and peace, whether they're from India, Central America, or even Alabama. They'll be here in this chapel speaking to us of the promise of tomorrow. This is a promise that the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel is fortified to continue the work that has been its pillar for generations, for decades. I remember many occasions being in these seats and seeing people such as Desmond Tutu, all of these people who come just sharing their hearts with us. And so we know that this chapel has opened its doors to all of us. So although it sits on the campus of Morehouse College, we can all claim it as our own. It represents the WorldHouse. It welcomes all of those who are furthering the work of peace and justice, but also the movement for inclusion and interfaith dialogue and cooperation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke loudly about the need for humankind to come together in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And I know many of us probably want to read that book right now. Because we are in a period where we are wondering, where do we go from here? King wrote, we have inherited a great world house in which we have to live together, Black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu, because we can never live apart again. We must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. Dr. King provided a great example and footsteps to follow. The doors of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel has been open to the Atlanta community and the world, whether celebrating the King holiday, crown forms, preaching a sermon, or teaching an ideology, or just being together to share a meal and conversation. This has been the place for the interfaith community. It has been the place that prepares the chapel assistants to become moral cosmopolitans in the world and has encouraged them to get to know the other. They have traveled with ICI World Pilgrims, an organization that I work for, that gives persons of faith an opportunity to travel and get a glimpse of how faith works in other areas of the world. But more importantly, it is about getting to know your neighbor that travels with you, so that when you return to Atlanta, you can say that I know someone who is Hindu. I have a friend who's Jewish. I have a friend who is Muslim. You know, so getting to know each other and being able to have those genuine conversations, those genuine dialogues where we're not afraid of each other. Because on our trips, we give you the opportunity to ask any question that you want to, so that we can begin to dispel some of the myths that we carry with us. And it's a wonderful beginning for deep personal relationships. So for generations, under the direction of the illustrious Dean Lawrence Edward Carter, relationships have been curated between people of all faiths from local, national, and global communities. In this place, the path forward for interfaith dialogue, cooperation, and bridge building is forever examined, renewed, and celebrated. So in the tradition of King, who was proudly and boldly Christian and not directly connected to Gandhi and his philosophy of nonviolence, friends with Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who spoke openly with him about the travesty of war, and for those Jews and Muslims who walked beside him during the civil rights movements, he understood the need for interfaith cooperation. And often we don't talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as an interfaith giant. He understood that God is multilingual and that God speaks in different languages. So on the campus of the great Morehouse College, in the WorldHouse represented by the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel through the leadership of Dean Carter, those languages are spoken here. On this occasion, I believe it's appropriate to say, thank you, Morehouse College. Thank you, Dean Carter, for this holy place, this beautiful chapel, this house, this beacon of light that we who seek peace, justice, interfaith fellowship, and cooperation, and for those of us who honor the example of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and who are willing to walk in his footsteps, we say thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this place that we all can call home.
Stand amidst a world where deception freely rolls, and integrity and the truth are held as crime. Yet reverently we stand, the heirs of this great land, and lift our voices high with cheerful song. voices high with cheerful song. Walk on, my faith. Walk on with hope. With renewed determination to press on. Sing praise to the God of all creation, the hope of every nation. See the victory before us and walk on. See the victory before us and
That piece of music was composed for the rededication of the chapel by one of our professors in the Department of Music and former chair, Dr. U.Z. Brown. Dr. Brown, are you in the house? There he is right there. Thank you. That anthem will become the official anthem of the WorldHouse Assembly, and that will be sung as long as I'm here. If you have your program, you notice it says presentation, the Reverend James Lawson Jr. Every year, we confer the Gandhi King Ikeda Community Builders Prize on some person internationally whose life work is the long shadow of Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Daisuke Ikeda is in his mid-90s in Tokyo. He's the third president of the Soka Gakkai International. I selected him to join this duo, Gandhi King, because I felt that his life's work mirrored and continued and made most relevant what I thought Gandhi and King would be saying and doing if they were alive today. If you've never Googled Dr. Ikeda, I suggest you do that. He's published over 200 books. And with the power of his pen, he has grown the Soka Gakkai beyond Japan, which was only 5 million when he became president in 1960, to 12 million in 192 countries and territories speaking over 20 languages. With his travel and the power of his pen, he has founded institutions around the world. Two most impressive are Soka University of Japan, founded in 1960, and Soka University of America in Orange County, California, founded in 2001. And I'm delighted to inform you, in case you don't know, I delivered the founding address. I want you to go on Google and Google Soka University of America. That's S-O-K-A. I think you will be jolly shocked. Only 22 years old and already has an endowment of $1 billion $400 million. It's first class, and one of their trustees was here being honored today. If you go in your program, the award is described between pages 16 and 23, and you will see most impressively the faces of the people on whom we have conferred or bestowed this award. That's what you're going to see. And you will see that Mikhail Gorbachev was one of them, just to let you know how high up, including Nelson Mandela, we have reached. Well, tonight, this award is being conferred on James Morrison Lawson Jr. He's the one who invited Martin Luther King Jr. to Memphis. He was the mentor of C.T. Vivian, John Lewis, Diane Nash, just to name a few, and helped them to lead the civil rights movement nonviolently in Nashville. He studied Gandhian nonviolent philosophy in New Delhi and has quite a story to tell. He's over 90 years old. He lives in Los Angeles. His wife is ill. And so he was videotaped receiving the award, and we'd like to show you that videotape this evening on our temporary video walls, and he will address you for just a brief moment. Guy, we're ready for the video.
This Gandhi King Ikeda Community Builders Prize prismatic flame features a bold floating flame in its center. It's a crystal obelisk that's topped with the prize recipient's name, with a solid stone base engraved with the prize name and sacred institutions upon which it is built. The striking image of the flame represents the spirit and vast potential to serve humanity in the spirit of Mohandas K. Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Daisaku Ikeda that resides within each human being. The Gandhi King Ikeda Community Builders Prize personalized prize certificate is under the seals of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel and Morehouse College, while signed by the college president and dean of the chapel. This one-of-a-kind calligraphic art piece summarizes the life work of the prize recipient, thus confirming their qualification as a preeminent global model of right thought and right action, co-creating Dr. King's beloved WorldHouse, aimed at genuine and lasting peace in the supremely humane tradition of Mohandas Karamchand Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Daisaku Ikeda.
Gandhi King Ikeda Community Builders Prize Elements, the medal. Highly detailed, front centering on the three namesakes, profiles with the word peace in their respective languages, Hindi, English, and Japanese. Under the respective images, overlaying the image of our planetary globe and emblazoned with the title, Gandhi, King, Ikeda, Community Builders Prize. On the back is the signature of each namesake with the origin of the prize listed. Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel, Gandhi Institute for Reconciliation, Morehouse College, Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Pastor Lawson, it is with great pleasure that I present you this Gandhi King Ikeda Community Builders Medal. No one more deserving.
Thank you, Monty.
Reverend Lawson, it is my honor to present you with this Gandhi King Ikeda Community Builders Prize, personalized certificate that reads in part, if I may read, the Reverend Dr. James Morris Lawson Jr., mentor, professor, and activist. You stand as a preeminent global model of right thought, right action, and prophetic personalism, co-creating Dr. King's beloved WorldHouse, aimed at genuine and lasting peace in the supremely humane tradition of Mohandas Karamchand Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Daisaku Ikeda, affirmed and witnessed under the seals of the college and the chapel this 13th day of October 2022, Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel, Morehouse College, Atlanta, Georgia, signed by David Anthony Thomas, president of Morehouse College, and Lawrence Edward Carter Sr., founding dean of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to Morehouse College and International Chapel, and Lawrence Carter, the president and chaplain there, and for the Gandhi Ikeda King Award. I appreciate very deeply the continuing witness that SGI and Dr. Ikeda make all around the earth in what Martin Luther King called the WorldHouse. That's oftentimes a very lonely witness, but it is an essential witness. Somehow, we of the human race must decide that if we are to exist in the long future of our universe, we must abandon any kind of loyalty to violence and war and to the national budgets that are war budgets. The war budgets of the earth, led by my own country, the United States, in plain sight in the world through the invasion of the Ukraine, are budgets that are made to produce hell on earth. Dwight E. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe during World War II, said very simply, "War is hell." And this award, to me, makes me even more determined that I will continue for as long as I have breath to address the issue of nonviolent struggle, nonviolent philosophy, nonviolence as a way of life, soul force, love force, life force, as the only hope for the survival of our planet and for the human race continuing in this galaxy of ours and in this beautiful universe. And I see this award as one such witness, a small, tiny voice in a kind of a wilderness in our world, where every nation on earth literally thinks that military armaments are critical to their national budgets, that war, though they say it is hell, they nevertheless prepare for war rather than doing the things that make for peace. I appreciate the International Chapel at Morehouse and SGI and Dr. Ikeda for continuing to make this witness in our world. And I accept this award in that spirit.
Good evening. Each event in the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel has its own character and inspiration. Tonight is no exception. Dean Carter, you are to be congratulated for your fortitude, your vision, and your action to make it happen. It motivates me, and I hope you too, to witness the accomplishments of those who have done so much to pave the way for future generations. The life of the Reverend James Lawson is one such example that deserves another round of acclamation and applause. The privilege of presenting to you tonight's speaker is another example. I know that you have heard his name, seen him on television, in the news, in the newspaper, maybe even on Politics Nation, leading the fight for the rights of many for whom much of the mainstream tends to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear as the news cycle changes. I present to you the next Reverend Al Sharpton. Not the next James Lawson, not the next Barack Obama, not the next Martin Luther King. Reverend Al Sharpton is a man who is not done yet. He is still carving out the path of his impact upon the world. My first encounters with Reverend Sharpton, he has no way of remembering, but it was when I moved to New York in 1978 and saw him standing up and fighting during those late 70s and 80s for those whose voices were not being heard. As a scholar of leadership, I've admired the way in which over these last 40-plus years, I have seen him evolve. I have seen him learn from his own practice, unafraid to present new aspects of himself. This is leadership in action. From childhood, Reverend Sharpton found his voice, began developing his oratorical skills, learning from great leaders, and joining the ranks of grassroots civil rights leaders who were changing America and the world. The Reverend Sharpton charted his own course and continues his journey through the National Action Network, a New Yorker by birth and style. Brooklyn, to be more precise. Sharpton has a swag all his own that places him at the table as complex problems come to light and humane and just solutions are sought. The table may be set in the streets. The table may be set in the boardroom, in the church, in the Congress, or in the White House. Those victimized and their families are too numerous to name here, but you have seen his face and heard his voice speaking out for a more just and equal society. Reverend Sharpton's efforts seek to remove the proverbial knee off the neck of humanity. For his actions, he's been arrested over 30 times. You may read and hear his story in the words of others through newscasts, podcasts, magazines, books, and other media. In his own words, you may engage his perspectives through several books, numerous lectures, as he continues to live out his call to preach through sermons, eulogies, and words of inspiration to individuals, families, communities, the nation, and the world. As a voice helping those seemingly without power, the Reverend Al Sharpton speaks to those holding positions of power, the truth. Please join me to welcome tonight's speaker, the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Thank you, President Thomas, and certainly to Dean Carter, and to all that have assembled for this historic occasion. And certainly I acknowledge with me some of the leadership of National Action Network that has come with me. One is an alum of Morehouse, a member of our national board, Reverend Michael Walron, is with us, and certainly Ron Saylor and Damon Byman, all from our office. But I must acknowledge someone that I think means so much to so many of us, and that is the youngest daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, Dr. Bernice King. When Dean Carter texted me and called me and asked me to give an address on this occasion, first of all, when Dean Carter calls you and makes a request, it is him only being polite, because his requests are usually with the expectation that you understand you're going to do whatever it is he requested. But he is one of the people that we have learned from and been led by that has earned the respect and honor of so many and has been effective in being able to transition throughout the ages of all of our journeys and remain in the level of respect that I don't know anyone has in the faith community than Dean Lawrence Carter. Give him another hand. We talk about saving democracy while thriving in the wake of cosmic trauma. And the fact of the matter is that as we rededicate this chapel, the turmoil that's going on worldwide, in large part, should be a challenge to all of us on where we are. I could easily talk about the demagoguery and the buffoonery that has now become common in our political world. And it's not difficult at all, particularly in Georgia, to talk about that. But the real challenge as we rededicate this historic chapel is whether we're going to rededicate ourselves. Because if you look at Ikeda, if you look at Gandhi, if you look at Dr. King, what they represented was faith in action. And we have reduced faith to what is self-aggrandizing rather than community healing. And we have reduced this to the size of who we use as our congregations and to what material gain we get as so-called leaders, and ignore the mission that we come for. As I was coming in and looking at Dean Carter's walls and many of the luminaries and historic figures that have come through the chapel that is now being rededicated, and I thought about how we could name them because of their service. And if you name a great person worldwide, their photos are around the walls in Dean Carter's offices. But we don't know them because of the kind of car they drove. We don't even know if they had a car. We don't know them because of their residence. We know them because of the work they did. And so many of us build what we call big ministries, but our ministries are not ministering to anybody. We do head counts like we are performers at the Fox Theater rather than ministers in houses of worship. I've been blessed and honored, the president referred to do eulogies on some occasions and remarks on other occasions. Dr. Bernice at many well-known funerals. I preached James Brown's funeral and Michael Jackson and on and on. But in the last several years, I've started turning down doing eulogies of just anybody because I got tired of having to get up and make up stuff for people. I mean, to be candid, and y'all know I'm very candid, most folks don't even deserve a funeral. Most folks should go straight from the morgue to the cemetery. Because most folk haven't done anything that we can talk about. They got them a nice house, nice car, nice plaques on the wall, and none of it will mean anything 2 minutes after they're gone. We'll put your house on the market, and the new owners will not care who lived there before them. We'll drive your car up and down I-20, and we'll change the ownership papers sooner or later. The only thing that will matter when you're gone is what you did for more than yourself. And to be part of rededicating this sacred site will mean nothing if you don't rededicate yourself to the service that this site represents. Every time I go to Washington, I think about some of our young people in NAN go with us. I think about how if you look at the Potomac River, they have the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument. And the one monument there that's there not because they held a political office, not because they sat on some throne, was a black preacher from Atlanta, Georgia, that stood up for what was right and true. No one could have imagined that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abe Lincoln will have to look across the Potomac at Martin Luther King. But if you do what God would have you do, God will give you a place that no one ever saw before. So rather than seek whatever edification you want, if you do the work, God can bless you with things that were unimaginable before you. Now, it is great for us to remember what happened, but what about where we are now? We are in a nation where democracy itself is at risk. We are in communities where young people are growing up and feel they solve their moral dilemmas by shooting and killing each other. We claim to be people of faith and get annoyed when homeless people come up and ask us to help them get a meal at night. What is the purpose of our religion if we don't practice it and personify it ourselves? We become experts at quoting philosophy and theology, but they cannot see our sermons in our daily lives. I come from Brooklyn. You got 5 churches on every block. But what are we doing with these churches? What is our purpose? We're full of titles with no functions. Ministers that don't minister to nobody. Missionaries with no missions. Trustees that can't be trusted. Titles with no functions. And we have too many churches. And I'm leaving tonight so I can get everybody mad, doesn't matter. We got too many churches I go to where you have more people in the pastor's aid committee than in the missionary society. Because we build up our own self-aggrandizement. And the result is what we're seeing, a nation that has gone astray. But where are the moral voices? Where are those that come in the spirit of Dr. King? Don't ever forget, I grew up in the northern part of SCLC. When I was 13, I became youth director of the chapter in New York. And I will never forget that about 3 weeks before Dr. King was assassinated, he came to New York in 1968 to install Wyatt T. Walker as pastor of Canaan Baptist Church. Some in the community were saying, we don't want that nonviolence here. Some in the community, I'm talking about preachers, were saying that day was over. When he went and led his last march in Memphis, some people got at the end of the march and disrupted the march. 2 days after he was assassinated, those same preachers was having the Martin Luther King memorials and taking the birthday and making it something for them. King changed the world because he stood for moral values that transformed the most powerful nation in the world, and he never fired one bullet and never took anything for himself. I remember as we have looked at this country, look at where we are right now. Just about a month ago, I was doing a eulogy in Buffalo, New York. 10 blacks had been killed in a supermarket just for being black. White supremacists came in and just shot everybody. And I did the last funeral of an 86-year-old grandmother. Her and her husband had been together over half a century. Husband had gotten ill, and they put him in a nursing home. And her children told me that she would go every day and feed him, and then go home and go back again, never missed a day. This particular Saturday, she went and visited her husband, and on the way home, she stopped by Top Supermarket to get her little something to go home and eat and go to bed. It was in the supermarket she got killed. And as I looked at her body, and Vice President Harris was there, I thought about how we cannot segregate this pain. I called the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt. I said, we need to deal with hate crimes across the board. There were synagogues that have been attacked, people killed in synagogues this past year. We saw LGBTQ people killed in an LGBT night outing. Hispanics killed. We cannot stand for what is right if we only stand for what is right for ourselves. We cannot fight for anybody unless we fight for everybody. And if we cannot do what we're doing tonight in this interfaith gathering, our faith means nothing if it is not enough faith to stand for everybody. I go to our scriptures in the Baptist church and in the Torah, and it reminds me of this story of where Joshua, if you that read the Bible, when you go home, read the 3rd chapter, Joshua led the children into the promised land, the children of Israel. But it was interesting to me, Jasper Williams, people, first of all, don't study. A lot of us quote scripture and don't read scripture. Joshua started as a young man raised in the values and morals of the faith teachers of that time. And he was raised at a time that he went against the core. Many of us know the story. God chose Moses to lead the children of Israel out of bondage. And the whole story of how Moses was raised in Pharaoh's house, not knowing that he was an Israelite, thinking he was an Egyptian. And when he found out who he was, he left and joined his people, which is dissimilar from what many of us do today. We get a job somewhere, a position somewhere, and we never go back to where we come from. We help to fight to put you in position, and you turn your back on those that fought to put you there. And we get in the black community Negro amnesia, where we forget where we come from and think we got there on our own. I had a debate one night with a well-known, I won't call his name out of respect to our Dean Carter, but I had a debate one night with a self-described black conservative, and he said to me, Reverend Al, I don't believe in all that marching and agitating y'all do. I made it on my merits. Look at my resume. I went to the right schools. I'm a member of the right fraternities. I have the right credentials. And I took his resume and I said, yes, it's very impressive. He said, civil rights didn't write that resume. I said, no, you're right. You went to the right schools. You have the right credentials. You're a member of the right fraternities. And you're also right. Civil rights did not write your resume. But civil rights made somebody read your resume. Don't you ever forget that some unlettered, illiterate grandmas put their bodies in front of biting dogs in Birmingham, spent nights in jail in Albany, Georgia, so someone would consider you. You're not the first smart Negro in America. There were folks brilliant before you, but they didn't have the opportunity you had. And they sponsored you. But unlike Moses, you became part of something that you never were. And it was an interracial, interfaith movement. Rabbi Abraham Heschel marched with Dr. King. Hindus and Buddhists marched and prayed with Dr. King. We've never had a movement that was just for us, by us. there were some blacks that would never join us, while there were some of different faiths and different races that put their bodies on the line. Why do we fight for the right to vote? 2 Jews and the blacks died for it. Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner. And here we are on the precipice of it being taken away. So Moses, I read this story of Joshua because it gives me some direction in these very turbulent times, traumatic times, as this title says. We see Moses encounters God with a burning bush. And God said, Moses, I want you to go back to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. You know the address because I arranged for you to grow up in that house. And Moses started doing what we all do, make excuses. Well, you don't need me. I got a heavy tongue. I stutter. God said, I knew you couldn't talk when you came up here. Just open up your mouth, I'll speak for you. God chooses people that are not perfect. He chooses people that are not what we would see as qualified. Because God can only get the glory if he takes the unlikely to do things that others couldn't and wouldn't do. So when Moses found out who he was and returned to his people and got an encounter around Sailor with one of the Egyptian military men and killed him, he left. We don't like to tell that part of the story, Dean Carter. When he left, he was a fugitive. Why would God call a murderer and a fugitive to be a liberator? He's telling you right there that he doesn't need perfect people. He doesn't need people with credentials. He don't need people that sit high and look low. I can take the lowest fugitive and murderer and make him a liberator for all time. God led Moses through 7 plagues, and finally, Pharaoh let the children go. They marched to the banks of the Red Sea. And God whispered in Moses' ear and said, now, something's going to happen here. Don't panic. I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Sometimes we encounter things and we say the devil's busy, but sometimes it's not the devil. Sometimes it's God challenging us. Sometimes it's God testing us. We like to graduate without passing a hard test. A lot of us want to go to college on a kindergarten test. And as God hardened Pharaoh's heart, Pharaoh sent for the recapturing of the slaves. And right away, those that had followed Moses walked out of bondage, walked off the shackles of oppression, got to the banks of the Red Sea, and as soon as they heard Pharaoh's chariots coming, they turned on Moses. Moses, you brought us out here to die. Wasn't there enough graves in Egypt? And there became a chorus from the Uncle Tom Israelites. Turned on Moses. You've got to have the moral strength to do what God tells you, even when your own crowd doesn't understand. You're not going to win the popularity contest if you pick up this mantle. You got to hold it even when you are not the toast of the day. And as they rebelled, God said, just stretch your rod out and made dry land in the middle of the Red Sea. Well, there was a little boy among them named Joshua. And Joshua saw what God did. When they got across into the wilderness, and Moses had them go and survey the land, old man Caleb was the only one in the group that disagreed with those that assessed the promised land and said, we can't conquer the land because to us they look like giants and we as grasshoppers. And Caleb disagreed and said, we can take the land because it's the land that God promised us. The only one in the group that agreed with Caleb was young Joshua. So Joshua grew up in these values. That's what this chapel is about. That's what Morehouse is about, to train young people to hold the values no matter what is popular, no matter what is trending, no matter what the norm of the day may be. And they went in the wilderness, and they wandered for 40 years, Amos Brown. 40 years. Why did they roam 40 years? Because even though they got Egypt and they left Egypt, they didn't get the Egypt out of them. They still had the Pharaoh's values. How do you know that, Sharpton? Because they were worshiping golden calves and worshiping trinkets and worshiping material things, building prosperity ministry in the wilderness. I told y'all gonna get mad before I get finished. And what was a several-month journey took them 40 years. Finally, when they moved on and some had died out, and Joshua became the leader after Moses, he knew what to do because he'd been raised with those values. He knew what to do at the Jordan because he was there at the Red Sea. And as he got across the Jordan, God said something different. He said, now before I let the waters come, I didn't divide them like I did Moses. I held them back. I want you to get 12 stones. 12 stones for what? I want you to get one stone for each tribe of Israel. And I want you to set these 12 stones up. Why set them up? We know that God opened up the Jordan. He said, no, it's not for you. It's one day your children will ask, what do these stones mean? And I want you to be able to tell the story that when all hope was gone, when all things seemed to be amiss, that the tribes got together, and when we got together, God made a way to the promised land. Well, tonight, Dean Carter's got the stones together. We opened with a Muslim prayer. We had a Hindu prayer. We come from different faiths, but it's time for the stones to come together because we need to lead this nation back to the promised land. Where we are today is wilderness behavior. We have politicians that have no character and no policy and no program. They're more into, as Dr. Lawson said, militarism than feeding the hungry. They will cut Social Security on seniors. They will cut child care and cut daycare. They love me and you when we're a fetus and then cut a program from us once we're born. How do you love me in my mother's womb and then turn on me the moment I'm born? Cut public education, cut daycare, cut child care is immoral. But you're going to fight for me to get here and then knock everything that I need to stand up once I'm here. You can't be pro-life and anti the living. But it's not only in the conservatives, it's among of us. When I look at when we used to, Jasper and all of us were dealt with a lot of the entertainers that helped build the moral fiber of the black community. I remember when I was a kid, James Brown was singing, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud." Aretha Franklin singing "Respect." Marvin Gaye was singing "What's Going On." Now we got all of our artists that have turned from all of that. How did we go from black and proud to getting on stage calling ourselves niggers? How do we go from respect to calling our women hoes and bees? Wilderness talk. How did we go from ministers that would stand with Dr. King and spend nights in jail to where now you won't come unless somebody gives you a private jet and 2 suites in a 5-star hotel? Wilderness talk. How did we go from choosing politicians based on service to now choosing politicians based on celebrity? Wilderness talk. And the results are our children are lost. But who lost them? Who were the ones that let them feel that the power was in a gun rather than the power of love? Those of us that should have been building the way turned into idolatrous ourselves. And that's the challenge as we rededicate this chapel, is to rededicate ourselves. We should not talk about Gandhi or Dr. King unless we're going to do what they say. We sing them songs, I want to be like Jesus. You don't want to be like Jesus. Jesus was not in the great cathedrals. Jesus was in the highways and byways. Jesus helped the whores and the prostitutes and the blind and the hungry. You don't want to be like Jesus. Jesus was condemned by the rulers of the churches of that day and said that you've turned my Father's house from a house of prayer to a den of thieves. You don't want to be like Jesus. You want to wear a cross. You don't want to bear a cross. And we built a culture of diamond-studded crosses rather than those that would bear the cross. And then we tell people to accommodate. When you have people that hold high office, you switch your politics to accommodate them rather than have a standard, as Dr. King did, that say they've got to come to where we are and stand on morality. Well, Reverend, you don't understand. We got to deal with who's in power. No, who's in power has to deal with us. If we stand up for what's right, we don't need preachers that will tell us how to be successfully oppressed. We don't need those that will tell us how to get rich but stay unequal, that offer us diamond-crusted shackles to be beat with golden whips. So what if it's golden? It's still a whip. So what if the diamonds on your shackles? You're still a slave. And then we've got this battle among ourselves. I hear folk right here in Georgia, well, I ain't voting for a woman. Woman got everything. God called my radio show. I ain't voting for Stacey. Women, you got a woman in the Supreme Court, a woman in vice president, woman this, woman that. You're holding black men. First of all, if black women got to step back for you to feel like you a man, there's something wrong with your manhood anyway. I looked on Dean Carter's wall, saw a picture of Shirley Chisholm. When I was 18 years old, I was youth director of her presidential campaign, 1972. I remember black men officials say we can't support a woman. We need to get this misogyny out. There is no values. There is no God in us. There is no man, I don't care how big and bad he is, that got here that did not come through the womb of a woman. And if you cannot exalt the woman that brought you here, then there's something out of sync with you. We look at this midterm election. Democracy is at stake. Supreme Court just come back with the Dobbs decision. Whatever your personal feeling or mine about abortion, the disturbing part of this, Walron, we're not talking about. The case was a case from Mississippi. They said they were going to limit You couldn't have an abortion past a certain amount of weeks. They fought it all the way up to the Supreme Court. The court did not come back and say you couldn't have an abortion. The court came back and said it's up to the state of Mississippi, which in effect overturned Roe versus Wade because there was no longer federal protection over what states decided. The whole battle of the Civil War was states' rights against the national government. And what has happened before our eyes in the last 60 days is they are now returning rights back to states to decide. Soon as they decided on the Dobbs decision, other states start changing their laws. And you might be against abortion. We may have personal feelings, but once states' rights become a model, next your voting rights will be states' rights. Next, your diversity programs will be states' rights. They have 2 cases coming up this session on affirmative action. They just heard the oral argument on gerrymandering. They are coming now with a whole political policy of going back to states' rights and our democracy's at stake. So in Georgia, you're going to have one set of laws to vote. In Alabama, another set of laws. Where are the moral voices that will stand up? That's why when they fought the Civil War, they did not say that we want to free the blacks in Georgia, then the blacks here. They wanted one national emancipation proclamation, one 13th Amendment, one union. And that is what the Civil War was about. We are back now into a states' rights model. And if we don't stop, we're going to lose this democracy dealing with personality politics rather than dealing with the threat of the day. When Dr. King and others fought for the Civil Rights Act, don't ever forget, Rosa Parks sat down in December '55. They did not stop fighting when they changed the law in Alabama in '56. They walked for a year. We always talk about they walked for dignity, walk with dignity rather than ride in shame. They changed the state law, but they didn't stop there. They kept fighting, and it took 9 years, but they got the Federal Civil Rights Act because you were not free till you had a federal law. Dr. King and Andy Young and others went to the White House where President Johnson was going to honor him for getting the Nobel Peace Prize in '64. Dr. King didn't let an award get in the way of his calling. He said, I'm happy, I'm appreciative for you honoring me, but President Johnson, we need a Voting Rights Act because they're blocking our right to vote. President Johnson said, well, Dr. King, I've used all my muscle to get the Civil Rights Act. I don't have the power to give you a Voting Rights Act. And Andy Young tells the story when they were leaving the White House. Andy Young said, Dr. King, did you hear what the president said? According to Andy, Dr. King said, yeah, I heard him. He said, what we going to do? He said, we're going back down south and get the president some power. And that's when, after Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed in Marion, Alabama, the birthplace of her mother, Coretta Scott King, that is what started the Selma movement. And when they were beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, it was the drama of that march that empowered Johnson to give us the Voting Rights Act. It was not the Voting Rights Act of Alabama. It was the Voting Rights Act federally. If we don't stand up now and demand the rights for everybody federally, we should never utter the name Martin Luther King. We should never utter the name of those that gave their life. This is about saving the democracy of this country. And this chapel is a temple to those that made a way for all of us. And lastly, if you have faith, you can fight and turn things around. Our personalities and charisma means nothing if we don't have it applied to some policies that will help God's people. Reverend, you know, I don't like a whole lot of that policy and political talk in my place of worship. Then you need to stop using scriptures. You know, I go to some churches, they say, Al, we just want you to preach. We don't want you to get into all that politics. I said, okay, well, tell me what Bible to use. Because you may have a Bible that is different than mine. I didn't get the Negro version of the Bible. Bible I got, the second book in the Bible was about an exodus of slaves fighting for liberation. I don't want you talking about women's rights. Well, then you got to take the book of Esther and the book of Ruth out the Bible. You've done this real marginalized Bible that you've created. Either stand up for the word or sit down and shut up. It's time for us to leave this rededicated and committed. We can save this nation. Why? Because we turn this nation around. Grandmas and grandpas, people on fixed income. Do you realize that Martin Luther King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks and Roy Wilkins, they changed the most powerful nation in the world on rotary phones and mimeograph machines. Here you got 2 cell phones in your pocketbook, got TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. We got 50 different ways to communicate and can't get 5 people together to do nothing. Imagine what they did and didn't have anything to work with. You preaching to thousands and others virtually watching you and got nothing to say. What does it matter that you can go virtual to say nothing? I'm getting so tired of preachers that the congregation preach more than them. Touch 5 people and say so-and-so. Well, when you gonna say something? Touch 5 people and say he ain't got nothing to say. So the challenge I have for you is let's rededicate ourselves. Because we're on the brink of this whole nation going back to states' rights. We're on the brink of everything that our forefathers fought for and gave us. Dr. King and that generation took us from the back of the bus to the White House. Obama didn't fight the fight, he's a result of the fight. We celebrate the fruit and forget the root. There wouldn't be a fruit if it wasn't a root. There would have never been a Barack Obama if it wasn't a Martin King. There would have never been a Kamala Harris if it wasn't a Coretta Scott King. It's the root that produced the fruit. And we must, out of this chapel and out of our schools of learning, teach the root of righteousness. And let them know that if God be for them and you follow the principles and values of your faith, that there's nothing you can't do. That God plus you can do anything. Don't go on your power. You might have a bad record. You might have done things in your background that are shameful. But if God can take a murdering fugitive and liberate Israel, God can take you to turn Atlanta upside down and turn this nation upside down. God is still on the throne. God still sits high and looks low. God takes the low and raises him high. You must connect to the God in you. And the God in you, no matter how you worship him, the God in you can give you the strength and power to make pharaohs bend and make your enemies leave you alone. I remember September 11, 2001, when they had the 9/11 attack in New York. And I was in Brooklyn at the time. It was primary day. I was campaigning for a particular candidate. And I stopped at a restaurant to get some coffee. And the owner said, Al, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And I thought it was something that had went off course. And I went ahead drinking my coffee, and he came back, he said, another one just hit. And I went in there and I said, oh, Lord, this is something else. And they closed the bridges, they closed the tunnels, they closed everything down. I had to walk all the way from Brooklyn to my headquarters in Harlem. And when I got there were people that come from everywhere. They closed the cell phones, so they came to our headquarters, the National Action Network, to see if we heard something. They had relatives in the World Trade Center. They wanted to know if we knew what was happening. They were panicking because we didn't know if another attack was coming. And I remember the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say. All these people, and I just couldn't find words of comfort. I'd been preaching since I was a little boy, and I could always say something, but I couldn't find words to say. And I went in my study, Bernice, and I sat down for a minute, and it came to me a preacher, an old preacher that I grew up under, told me, he said, Reverend Al, he said, one night I was sitting in my study getting my message together for the next morning, and I started reading this book. He said, and I got so enthralled in the book, I started reading about 8:15. I looked at the clock, it was 10 o'clock after my bedtime, but I couldn't put the book down. And I kept reading. He said, and I read a little while more. I looked up and said, Lord, it's 11:15. He said, I couldn't put it down. And as it approached midnight, he said, Al, I cheated. I turned to the end of the book because I wanted to see how the story was going in. And as I thought about that, sitting there 9/11 in my study, I took my Bible out. In the midst of not knowing if another attack was coming, in the midst of not knowing what to say to comfort people, I cheated, Bernice. I turned to the end of the book. I turned to Revelations and I read that the first will be last and the last will be first. And the lion and the lamb going to lay down together. And God will make a way for his children. I've been to the end of the book. I don't care what they do and what they say. If we stand up, God will have the last word. I've been to the end of the book. God will make a way for his children. God will make a way for his children. God will make a way for his children.
There is no doubt the chapel has been rededicated and the theme has been addressed. Saving democracy while thriving in the wake of cosmic trauma. You see why I invited our speaker. We have a real interfaith platform. Judaism, Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam. And I think I see a couple of atheists in the audience. Remember that wise sage from California who uttered those famous words, "Can't we all get along?" Rodney King. We want you not to forget that the book that we created for this occasion will be available, Slavery and Its Consequences, Racism, Inequity, and Exclusion in the USA. That's just for a small free will offering. In 1982, I went to the office of the president of the college, Dr. Hugh Gloster, and I said, I want to found an international hall of honor to further embellish Dr. King's religious memorial. You may not be aware, but you are seated in the world's most prominent religious memorial to Martin Luther King. Dr. Gloucester proposed that the honorees be preachers and presidents for our initial focus. We later expanded that focus to those whose life work mirrored aspects of the life and legacy of Dr. King on peace, nonviolence, economic justice, civil, human, environmental, and voting rights, the abolition of nuclear weapons and war, health concerns, and saving democracy to advance equal opportunities, education, personal, social, and religious freedoms. When you entered the crown nave of the chapel this evening, the ushers may have provided you with a QR code, if not this evening, maybe this morning, to view today's program. The biographies of our oil portrait honorees may also be found within your QR code. Tonight, we move from portrait unveilings to portrait inductions. And so the long tributes that you are accustomed to me delivering for each honoree ended at the Morehouse commencement this year. And tonight, I will call the names of the 27 honorees who have been inducted. That means you may be home before midnight. The pictures will appear on our temporary video walls of the portraits. After this event, I'm told, a week or two, hopefully, the permanent, much larger video wall will descend from the stage house in the middle of the platform. Andre Patillo, Morehouse Athletic Director. Arthur J. McAfee, Jr., basketball coach for whom the court in Forbes Arena is named. Beulah Harold Gloucester, beloved 7th First Lady and Professor of English at Morehouse College. B.T. Harvey, serving at Morehouse from 1912 to 1958, was the winningest coach of his era. Edwin C. Moses, world record holder in the International Olympics. Brother Moses is on the platform. Won't you stand? Franklin L. Forbes, coached at Morehouse for 40 years, is author of the school's History of Athletics. Frederick Douglass, the greatest black abolitionist of the 19th century. James Morris Lawson Jr., preeminent authority on the Gandhian philosophy of nonviolence in the 20th century civil rights movement and the Second Reconstruction. Jasper W. Williams. Yes, 72 years, a preacher and a pastor. 72 years, who helped shape the political landscape of Fulton and Clayton counties. Joel Tyler Lassiter II. Architect of the chapel's restoration, a superior eye for excellence, and a spirit of seldom witnessed generosity. And I might also add patience. John Hope, the fourth and first black president of Morehouse College, the first civil rights president in the American Academy. John Sylvanus Wilson Jr., the 11th president of Morehouse College. Joseph T. Robert, the first president of Morehouse College, who created the first comprehensive curriculum. Harriet Tubman. The first black general in the United States Army who helped save the Union. Howard Washington Thurman, one of the two greatest graduates of Morehouse College. Hugh Morris Gloucester Sr., founder of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel and founder of the Morehouse School of Medicine. Kenneth and Hortenius Chenault. Kenneth Chenault, former president of American Express, whose father was an alumnus of Morehouse College. Leon Gregory Allain, the original architect of King Chapel. Oprah Winfrey, philanthropist extraordinaire. Robert W. Woodruff, the late president of Coca-Cola Company. Samuel Archer, fifth president of Morehouse College. Samuel Graves, the second president of Morehouse College. Virgil Wood, Virginia and New England Executive Director of SCLC, the Southern Leadership Conference. Yolanda and Dale Jones are in the audience. Won't you stand? President and chair of their family foundation, and without them, you wouldn't be here tonight. William Edward Burkhart Du Bois, the founder of the NAACP, and widely believed to be the founder of the field of sociology. Tonight, his great, 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 great grandson is in the house. Won't you stand? Here he is right here. Al Sharpton. The most courageous and fearless civil and human rights nonviolent leader of our era. Dr. Marva Griffin Carter. Won't you stand? Inaugural First Lady of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel. And because of the students of Morehouse College, my 35th anniversary here. I'm now in my 43rd year. But for my 35th anniversary, the students of the college, under the leadership of the Reverend Matthew Von Johnson, Sr., raised $7,000 and surprised me with an oil portrait of me. And I took it home. And they were upset. A few weeks ago, I brought it back. And so. Thank you. There is one more person I want you to meet, and then we will be ready for the postlude. But let me say, if you want to see the full impact of the portraits, go through that door and walk through the corridor to the stairs. Go up, across, and down, and then come down this corridor, and you will witness over 200 of portraits that help to give us stained glass windows in paint. We have with us this evening the great nephew of Robert E. Lee. That's significant. Robert E. Lee had to surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. And his quadruple grandnephew is an ordained minister and pastor who has committed his life to saving democracy. I want you to meet him. Won't you stand? Robert W. Lee. You see how wonderfully diverse we are. We want you to remain seated for the postlude, and then our meeting is adjourned. Oh, yes. There is a note on the bottom of my program in red, and I overlooked it. I think there's going to be a presentation.
So we are almost done, and I'll make this quick. Good evening, shalom. Earlier today, and again this evening, we had the privilege of hearing my good friend, Rabbi Larry Cernowitz, blow the shofar, this shofar. In Jewish tradition, the sounding of the shofar is used for different reasons, including the celebration of new beginnings. As we gather here in celebration and rededication of this chapel, it is so fitting for the sound of the shofar to accompany the celebration. 3 years ago, as I assumed my role as Consul General of Israel to the southeastern United States, one of the first meetings that I held was with Morehouse President Thomas, followed by a meeting with the Reverend Dr. Carter, Reverend Terry Walker, and Mr. Wendell Shelby Wallace, who joined our team at the consulate while finishing his studies here at Morehouse. I knew that I wanted to create a meaningful relationship with this landmark institution, building on past relations and exploring together paths for joint work. Over the course of the last 3 years, we have developed a partnership and friendship that continues to grow. Last year, 2 years ago now, we launched Covenant, a partnership between our consulate and the chapel, which commemorates the rich history of African American and Jewish collaboration and mutual support. Within the framework of Covenant, various joint programs that we have held and continue to work on together, including 8 paid student fellowships, which draw upon the legacies of African American, Jewish, and Israeli leaders, Henrietta Sold, Abraham Joshua Heschel, Constance Baker Motley, Yitzhak Rabin, Samuel Du Bois Cook, Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King Jr., and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who have each, in their own way, contributed to the building of the beloved community, and have also inspired generations of moral cosmopolitans devoted to the rigorous study and pursuit of peace, justice, and reconciliation. My dear friend, Reverend Dr. Carter, this shofar was procured especially for this occasion. This chapel being the first and only public space in which it has been heard. The inscription here on the bottom of the shofar reads, Covenant Shofar, on the occasion of the historic rededication of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel at Morehouse College, presented in partnership and friendship to Reverend Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter Sr. by the Consul General of Israel and Nat Sultan Dadon. I would like to present it to you as a symbol of friendship, partnership, and wishes for many more years of joint work.
This is the shofar horn that you heard earlier. I first heard this in Jerusalem when I was attending a Jewish worship service, and it startled me. And the moment I heard it, I said, that sound will be heard in King Chapel. It was a much larger horn, and it sounded like it was thundering from the embankments of glory. I'm very grateful, but of course you all realize there's no such thing as a self-made person. Everybody is dependent on somebody. And so the people who are surrounding me have been like my wife, the wind under my wings. I'm most grateful, and I'm also going to take this opportunity to pass this on by announcing that in April, I'd like you to come back for our next College of Ministers and Laity, our Martin Luther King Jr. College of Ministers and Laity will be one day. And in our Interfaith Assembly, we're going to honor Bernice King. Okay? She did not know that, but she's about to find out how. I'll keep that a surprise from you. Thank you so very much on behalf of our president and all of the Morehouse family. Thank you. Okay. One more presentation. Christmas in October.
I am your Fulton County Commissioner, Natalie Hall of District 4, and it is an honor to present these proclamations. First, may I say to Reverend Al Sharpton, oh, he is not there. He really said a word for me because I am that on-the-ground elected official who people call unconventional, and if unconventional is being in the neighborhoods with our people, I will continue to do that. And if unconventional is making sure that our Black and brown communities are healthy beyond just mind, body, and spirit, but with affordable housing, access to quality health care, and so much more, then I will continue to do that. So, the first proclamation is for honoring Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel. And it reads, whereas the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel at Morehouse College, also known as the King Chapel, was built in 1978 and is the world's most prominent religious memorial to Morehouse alumnus and Atlanta native, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., 1948. And whereas King Chapel is home base for spiritual servants, scholars, and thought leaders who are furthering the work of peace and justice in the tradition of Dr. King, Howard Washington Thurman, 1923, Benjamin Elijah Mays, and others who have used the gospel to manifest Christ's teachings. And whereas King Chapel serves as a center for perpetuation of the evolutionary values of cosmopolitan spiritual ethics, nonviolence, service, and harmony in everyday life, and whereas the chapel's rededication is a 2-day series of commemorative programs that includes a symposium of sessions led by distinguished Morehouse College professors and scholars, and special guests including Ambassador Andrew J. Young and the Reverend Al Sharpton Jr. And whereas the chapel's rededication follows an $11 million renovation of the historic building with the theme, Saving Democracy While Thriving in the Wake of Cosmic Trauma. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Fulton County Board of Commissioners recognizes the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel for its long-standing position in the city of Atlanta and Fulton County as a center of peace and celebrates its rededication, and does hereby proclaim Thursday, October 13, 2022 as Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel Appreciation Day in Fulton County, Georgia. Congratulations. And it doesn't stop right there. Thank you. And this is in honor of you. And it reads, whereas the Reverend Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter Sr. was born on September 23, 1941 in Dawson, Georgia, and earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in Social Science and Psychology from Virginia University of Lynchburg, and his Master of Divinity, Master of Sacred Theology, and PhD degrees from Boston University. And whereas Dr. Carter has served as Associate Dean of Daniel L. Marsh Chapel at Boston University, and later taught at Harvard University Divinity School, and served as Coordinator of African American Studies at Simmons College. And whereas Dr. Carter has led the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel as its dean since it was erected in 1978, and is also the founder of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel Assistance Program for pre-seminarians, and director of the Martin Luther King Jr. College of Pastoral Leadership and the WorldHouse Academy. And whereas in 1958, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. privately recruited Dr. Carter as a 10th grader to attend Morehouse College, and 21 years later, he became dean of the chapel that honors Dr. King's legacy, and he recently celebrated his 43rd year as a Morehouse College professor. And whereas he has since commissioned the Gandhi King Ikeda Institute of Cosmopolitan Virtue Ethics and Reconciliation in 1999, created the Gandhi King Ikeda Community Builders Prize of the Morehouse Chapel in 2001, and founded Morehouse College's International Hall of Honor. And whereas Dr. Carter's proudest achievement is that of his family, he is the proud husband of Dr. Marva Griffin Carter, professor of music history, popular music, and world music at Georgia State University, and proud father of their son, Lawrence Carter Jr. Now therefore be it resolved that the Fulton County Board of Commissioners recognizes Dr. Lawrence Carter Sr. for his commitment to the preservation of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and for his dedication to the education and spiritual wellness of countless young minds, and does hereby proclaim Thursday, October 13, 2022 as Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter Sr. Appreciation Day in Fulton County, Georgia. Gasping like, I'm glad I got it right. Would you like to say something? Yes. You can hold that. Can you hold this? Sure. I'm going to hold these two.
I'm trying to hurry up and get this over so I don't start crying. Thank you so very much. I love you all.